Both sides, we have pulmonary arteries on the right and on the left, which will supply blood to the lungs. Or let's say deoxygenated blood to the lungs. They are the only arteries in the human body which are not red.
Talking about the thoracic aorta. Now the very important thing is we are not talking about the thoracic internal artery, because we have seen the internal thoracic artery earlier. We are talking about the part of aorta which is inside, which is in the curvature of aorta, which is in the thoracic or the chest cavity region. So we have seen definitely the carotid arteries, the internal and external carotid. We have seen common carotid. What we have not seen is how from the arch of the aorta they come off. Now from the right side we have definitely see a very interesting structure, and I have also talked about this earlier. So on the right side we have something called the brachiocephalic artery. Finally, do see that the brachiocephalic artery will give its branches to the right subclavian and the common carotid. On the left side, however, we don't have brachiocephalic artery. Why we don't have? Because we have the apical, or the, let's say, the superior lobe of the left lung, which is quite larger, and also we have something called the ligamentum arteriosum, or we have pulmonary arteries coming out, or let's say from the lungs to the heart. So we don't need an extra, we don't have an extra space for, on the left side we don't have extra space for brachiocephalic artery. That's why we see the common carotid artery on the left side is larger than the common carotid artery on the right side. We definitely do have common carotid and left subclavian artery. The subclavian arteries have the costocervical, thyrocervical, and also the internal thoracic branches. One very interesting branch, which is called thyroid artery, goes directly, yes, the thyroid artery goes directly, very interestingly, it goes directly from the arch of aorta to the thyroid cartilage. On both sides we have pulmonary arteries. Now the function of pulmonary arteries, the arteries by definition are the vessels, are the blood vessels which carry the blood from the heart away. Now which takes the blood from the heart and they will take the blood away. That's the basic definition of the arteries. They will never carry the blood towards the heart. On the both sides we have pulmonary arteries on the right and on the left, which will supply blood to the lungs, or let's say deoxygenated blood to the lungs. They are the only arteries in the human body which are not red. Near the bifurcation of right and left pulmonary arteries. On the left pulmonary artery side, however, we see something called ligamentum arteriosum. Ligamentum arteriosum is the remnant of the arterial shunt which was in the embryonic life of the fetus, or let's say the embryonic life that existed, the arterial shunt existed. Why the ligamentum arteriosum exists? Because when we were in embryonic or fetal stage, we did not have the functioning lungs. We did not have the functioning lungs, so we required something called the arterial shunt. And when we started to breathe on ourselves, we have not the shunt requirement, but we need to close the shunt, so there's only the remnant of that in the form of a very diseased remnant, let's say in the form of just a ligament, very narrow, just the attachment side on the left pulmonary side, we see that. We'll talk about descending aorta when we talk about the descending aorta, but we stay in the thoracic region only. Now mind it, we are not talking about the internal thoracic artery, we are talking about the descending aorta. In the thoracic region or in the chest cavity region, we see something called not pulmonary arteries which go inside the lungs, but we need something which also supplies the exterior part of the lungs. That's why we have bronchial arteries. Now we have seen the anterior intercostal arteries are the branches of internal thoracic arteries, but the posterior intercostal arteries are the branches of thoracic aorta. This is very important because the internal thoracic artery is the branch of subclavian artery, not a direct branch of descending aorta, descending thoracic aorta, because of the fact that there are very large and wide spaces in the posterior part of the ribs. So we would definitely need a extensive blood supply in the back region compared to the anterior region, because the anterior region is supplied vastly by also not only the internal thoracic artery. In the descending aorta of the thoracic part, we definitely see one branch going off to the mediastinal space. Now we have seen the mediastinal branch also of internal thoracic artery, but this one is different. This one is quite efficient and larger because mediastinum is apical, anterior, posterior and lateral. So mediastinum is a big chest cavity in which the heart is enclosed, so we need extensive blood supply to that. We have cardiums, cardial layers, endoperi, and now we don't talk about endocardium in here, but pericardial and the space between the cardiums where there is pericardial fluid. For the maintenance of pericardial fluid, we need the mediastinal arterial branch. Along with the mediastinal branch going to the chest cavity, we also have in the descending thoracic aorta, the part which is coming down in the thoracic or the chest cavity region, we also have the subcostal arteries which are below the ribs. Subcostal means below the ribs. Above the ribs, we have definitely seen the costocervical trunk, which is a branch of the subclavian artery, which we are not talking about here. But just for the reference, the subcostal arteries are the direct branches of the descending thoracic aorta, unlike the supracostal branches, which are from the costocervical trunk of the subclavian artery. Now this we have seen an analogous thing like this only. The posterior intercostal branch, we have seen that they are direct branches of the descending thoracic aorta. But the anterior intercostal arteries are not the direct branches of descending thoracic aorta. Instead, they are the parts of internal thoracic artery coming off of subclavian artery.